The image for this particular video is going to be largely irrelevant. I'm not particularly interested in that for this purpose. This is intended as a kind of close reading of a statement that Mitch McConnell made regarding the 1619 project, which is specifically designed to address the history of colonial oppression, racism, the history of slavery, and the African American Holocaust in public education. The reason that this project has emerged at this time should be fairly obvious, because our country is going through a crisis of racial division that is largely inspired by projects of democratic exclusion, projects of racial violence that have been instigated not merely at the beginning of the Trump administration, but certainly expanded dramatically. And these projects, I'm specifically going to address a statement by Mitch McConnell, who listeners and viewers of my work will be aware is what seem to be obvious misrepresentations of a history that he should be aware of, statements of naivete and ignorance that are almost unimaginable for someone in his position, not pretending not to understand that, for example, professional sports has always been a site of political and racial challenge and change in the United States. Not understanding basic principles of the Constitution in relationship to democracy and people's voting rights, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So he's come under the scrutiny of my artistic project on a number of occasions. I want to do a kind of almost poetic close reading of a statement that he made regarding the 1619 project, and I'll quote the statement. It's a one line, it's one sentence, and then I'll read it almost word by word. All right, so here's the statement. Americans do not need or want their tax dollars diverted from promoting the principles that unite our nation toward promoting radical ideologies meant to divide us. All right, so the first word, let's address the first word, Americans. All right, so in this word, the first thing that occurs to me is that Mr. McConnell assumes that he has the right to speak for all Americans, and that Americans are homogeneous in their beliefs and understandings of politics, ideology, and the needs of education. So this term Americans here is acting, first of all, it signifies citizens of the United States, not the Americans of the Americas, but it makes further claims about the citizens of the United States and their homogeneous beliefs, their who is allowed to speak for them. Mitch McConnell has some insight into who we all are and what we all want, and the integrity of those beliefs and desires and those needs. All right, so let's examine the next word, or maybe phrase. Americans do not need, okay. But what do they not need? Let's look at that. Their tax dollars. Ooh, that's a trigger fish, isn't it? Their tax dollars diverted. Okay, so diverted is something interesting. So when we say diverted, you can imagine a river, and the river has a natural course, right? It has a course that's established by the geology of the terrain. It has a course that's established by weather patterns. And to divert that river for some other needs is to change the natural environment or to challenge something that is pre-established, right? So it's diverting. All right. Where are the tax dollars supposed to go? Somewhere else. All right. So they do not need or want. And then tax dollars is, like I said, this big trigger fish because what? Oh, you're taking away my money. This belongs to me. If you took out the tax dollars, because the tax dollars, the money is, we're going to pay taxes no matter what, right? So that's a red herring, right? We're going to pay taxes. It's just one of the things we do. It's one of our traditional duties in being citizens of the United States. Education is public, or it is part of the democratic principles, like believe in education and need to, because uneducated people will have less understanding of what their government actually does and what their needs are in relationship to that government. But anyway, tax dollars is there to divert you from and incense you, right? It's there to incense you that my money is going for something that I want. But who am I in this address? It's so interesting. These are the Americans who do not need or want. These are the Americans who do not need or want. Let's look at who would need, right? In what way would anyone whose history is being misrepresented in the public school systems by not being included in this word American not need or want to readdress this history? Do not need or want their tax dollars diverted from promoting the principles that unite our nation. So the principles that unite our nation that McConnell is referring to, I had just put up a piece that addresses, and I had referred to these principles as idols and false ideas. And I had presented an image of Monticello and its classical architecture and the order that classical architecture represents in this image. I hadn't discussed the Latin e pluribus unum, and I hadn't discussed a lot of the underlying assumptions in the image, but I had attempted to present in the shiny tracing of a nickel the sort of shiny token of glorified classical order that is the foundation of a lie. That lie is the substance, right, that promotes what he refers to as the principles that unite our nation. So to believe in, for example, in the Declaration of Independence, what is presented as these Lockean ideals, right, of the right of the white U.S. citizen to own property, to be his, because it is a his at this time, right? Women don't acquire the vote until 1920. To be his own man, right? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That myth, right? McConnell bemoans being replaced with what he refers to as radical ideologies. Tax dollars will be diverted from the myth of American life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, presented so beautifully on our American currency, not just the nickel, but elsewhere. But let's focus on the nickel for now, and Monticello, which was the site of a plantation in which human beings were exploited as slaves to promote the pursuit of happiness of a white man. That's not a radical ideology, that's a fact. Radical ideology is defined here by an educational program driven to tell the truth. So telling the truth, providing the dates, describing the events of the Middle Passage, in short, really, the truth here is this, that the removal of the mythological, ideological, racist mask that Thomas Jefferson, that George Washington, that Madison and the others have been wearing, the removal of that mask, the exposure of the myth, the presentation of the facts as they actually occurred, is what McConnell defines as a radical ideology. So in this close reading of this passage, I want to underscore that. Radical ideology means telling the truth. Now, does telling the truth divide us? McConnell wants to claim that it does. And yet, McConnell was one of the most outspoken critics of H.R. 1, the For the People Act. H.R. 1 impedes bills being put in place across states in the United States, including Georgia, Arizona, Texas, that all have responded to the victory of a Democratic candidate for the presidency of the United States by making it more difficult for people of color to vote in all of those states. And H.R. 1 addresses this. So how is McConnell's promotion of principles that unite our nation by making it difficult for people of color to participate in democracy, how is that uniting? It's uniting for McConnell, I think, because the mask creates the illusion that Americans speak from this white European colonialist perspective, in which certain ideals are adorned with this mask. And to remove the mask is to say, who is this American behind the mask? This white mask that this one wears. Who is this one? What principle, what idol are we going to wear if this mask is removed? This is why the truth is so dangerous for someone like McConnell. Because he's aware of the role of the role that the mask plays in the distribution of power and the distribution of wealth across racial boundaries in the United States, across class boundaries in the United States. And the need for that mask to fabricate a history that's untrue. In order for people like him to promote the idea that H.R. 1, the For the People Act, is something menacing and part of a radical ideology, and that those bills across states like Georgia and Arizona and Texas that impede the right to vote are part of this, really, for him, part of this program of promoting the principles that unite our nation. And that is denial. A lot of that is denial for this masked white American to retain the illusion of a kind of universal subjectivity in the United States. And this one, this universal subject, because he is a he, isn't he, does not need or want his tax dollars diverted. Because where should my tax dollars go? We all know where Mitch wants the tax dollars to go. Into programs that make rich Mitch more richer Mitcher. Meant to divide us. And yet, McConnell does not see that the failure to support a bill like H.R. 1, the For the People Act, which sees clearly and has something to say about those state bills in Georgia and Texas and Arizona and elsewhere that are now being promoted to take away people's rights to vote under all kinds of banners, right? Like it was presented to the Supreme Court in this way. We will not be able to compete in these states, that is the Conservative Party, unless special allocations are made. As if the GOP had rights, not the citizens of the United States. Where in the Constitution does it say a political party has the right to compete in an election and that competition should be based on getting the numbers as close to as possible for such a competition to take place? If the party can't compete, it needs to change its ideology and values. That seems obvious. Who is the us that are being divided? We've been divided forever. So finally, I'll just say to close, many Americans who have been excluded from history, by history, and the masks that history has adorned itself and its words for itself, including American, do need and want their tax dollars used to tell the story that belongs to the truth of history rather than used to promote a myth of white American universal power and subjectivity that belies and misrepresents the history of racial injustice, oppression, racial violence, separatist policies and ideologies of exclusion, and definitions of who belongs to the term citizen, performative languages and literature that promote white supremacy in the United States. Yes, many Americans do need and want their tax dollars to address this history, to challenge it, to change it, and to be done with it. Mitch.